What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are in week 2 of our John Wesley, everything about him. We're talking story, we're talking theology, we're talking practices.
Yeah.
We're breaking it down.
That's a good way to put it. Maybe not everything about him. That'd take too long.
That would take all the time.
But yeah, are looking at John Wesley and his theology and wisdom and the Methodist movement.
Right.
And so I've gotten great feedback from the series. So
it's kind of nice to get back to our roots a little bit.
Well, it's actually, the series is actually called Roots, but it is the subtitle is Theology and Wisdom of John Wesley. So let's talk about this, shall we?
Let's do it. All right, Dave, we are at a little bit of a lull as it comes to sports for this week. But then baseball playoffs are really going to kick up, at least for the Braves. How far do you see them going?
All the way.
All the way.
Depends on pitching.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I gotta think they're going all the way.
Yeah, you got to, as a fan, you got to root hard.
I got to. I mean, I haven't really sat down and done an analysis of it.
Right.
But I do really like our chances.
I do too. The offense can hit. They can score.
It just kind of seems like a team of destiny, doesn't it?
You know, so when we won last time, I just remember thinking we were never out of a game and just had this like quiet confidence about them. And I feel kind of similar about this team as like, even if we go down early, like I don't feel like we're out of a game ever. Where there have been some seasons where you would just watch and be like, oh, we're down 3 runs in the first. We were not going to win. You know what I mean? Like,
but when Azuma hit the second home run on Sunday to tie the record, that just seems kind of like this team, a very special team.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about it as a very special team. And so I think it would be a surprise. Of course, you know, to go back, you know, I'm also a Golden State Warriors fan in basketball.
Right.
And the year that they broke the record, and I'm not trying to jinx us here.
Yeah.
They lost in the finals that year. Yeah. So I mean, it doesn't. You got to play the postseason.
Sure.
But I like our chances.
And that's what I can appreciate. I don't know if you saw the interview they did with Matt Olson, but people were talking about, they're like, man, was it great? He's like, yeah, one of the best seasons any team could be a part of. He says, but the beauty of playoffs is that everybody goes back to 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Yeah.
All stats, all that's gone. You got to play and you got to hit in the playoffs. And I think with that mentality.
Plus experience, we've had experience now. So so it's all good. I'm super looking forward to it. It is a lull for watching the Braves. There are other things to watch. You know, and football season and NBA is cranking up with preseason.
Yep.
So it's a pretty busy sports time of year, actually.
Ooh, I actually wanted to ask you about one other thing. Did you happen to see any clips from the U2 concert in the Dome?
Oh, gosh.
Oh
man,
isn't it insane?
It's unbelievable.
If you don't know what we're talking about, there's a new dome that was built in Las Vegas that has like 1 billion LED sensors, and they just did a big U2 concert in it. And like, I mean, they can light up everything in the building. I thought you would appreciate it. That's all I did.
And it is interesting. It's super expensive, and I'm sure tickets are super expensive.
Yeah.
But you know, most arenas like that are built for sports, or at least multi-purpose. This is the first place that's been built for music entertainment.
Yeah.
And it's incredible what they can do there.
Yeah.
It's just
stuff. Anyway, let's
has nothing to do with John Wesley.
Has nothing to do with John Wesley, but I wanted to hear your opinion because I was like, this is something Dave would appreciate.
Yeah.
But,
so if you're watching this, hoping to hear about John Wesley, and you made it through to these 5 minutes.
Yeah, you made it through the first. Now we'll actually start talking about what we need to talk about. So, Dave, why don't you kind of get us rolling? Tell us what we talked about on Sunday.
So, you know, this series is just kind of, I'm enjoying doing it, and I've gotten lots of good feedback from people who I think are enjoying hearing it. And those are the best types of message series, you know, when everybody is enjoying it. I'm enjoying some of the additional research that I've been doing for it. You know, and some of the feedback I've gotten. This one church member, and this will show up either this week or next week, but she has ancestors, I think great grandparents, who met and were with Frances Asbury, and she has all the documentations and letters and stuff of that. And so just, right here within our own congregation.
That's
so
cool.
So some of the stuff that's come out of that, but just kind of like our roots.
Yeah.
Kind of tracing our roots back to, John Wesley. Of course, we're part of the, I guess, sort of Reformation but kind of looking at how where the Methodist Church came from.
Yeah.
And, out of the Anglican Church, but of course, heavily influenced by some other things as well, and the Moravians. And so the first week, I kind of told the story of John Wesley and some of the theological points that we could get out of that with the heart, head, heart, and hand, which we talked about last week. This week, we took it from after that Aldersgate experience, after his decision to go out inside and preach, when he said, I submitted therefore to be more vile and stooped to the level of field preaching, and broke with that sort of formal tradition that he had. And this revitalization maybe broke out in England with his preaching and his teaching and his organization. And so we kind of picked it up there this past Sunday, and we took it all the way to where the Methodist Church started in America.
Right.
And so just to quickly summarize that, if you haven't watched the sermon or haven't watched any of the sermons or last week's podcast, just very quickly, John Wesley, born 1703, son of an Anglican priest, grew up highly educated, Oxford educated, was a person who also saw the great need to not just know about it, but to do something. So he came to America, to Savannah, actually, to be a missionary or to help, be the pastor to the colony there in Savannah. Not very successful. We talked about that. Came back, was feeling very defeated, and then had this Aldersgate experience where his heart felt strangely warmed. We might say an experience of the Holy Spirit. And when the head and the hand and the heart came together, then the rest just kind of grew out of there. And so as this began, and he started preaching outside, and people were coming to Christ, and this movement was growing, he also had these incredible leadership and organizational skills. And so he began to organize this movement into what they might call Methodist societies as large groups in areas, but then they were broken down into smaller groups, which he called classes. And there were also some kind of overlapping thing called bands. Classes would be 10 or 12 people, right, and it could be, men and women. Okay. The bands were, men and men, women and women, but they would also be a separate group for married men and single men and married women and single women. So those are the bands. And so these groups, this is a revival that's going on. This is a movement that's happening. And so they, wanted to get together and celebrate that from time to time. And so about once a quarter, they started getting together to have a big service with, testimonies and what do you call love feast. Yeah. And then out of that, eventually they started having church services on Sunday as well. Now, they're still part of the Anglican Church, and Wesley's intention never to start a new denomination. He wasn't trying to divide off from the Anglican Church. He was trying to start a movement, a revival within the Anglican Church. But because of the success of it all, there became this need to organize that movement. And so eventually it began to spread into, Scotland and Ireland and all the British Isles. And so he would send preachers. He began, there were lay pastors, but he was giving them credentials and sending them out into certain areas for a time, which they called circuits. So they would go on a circuit to one community, to other community. And so we here in the United States, if you're old enough, and I guess they still have these in certain places, Methodist churches will be on a circuit where when I served Holly Springs up here for a while when I was in seminary, and they had been on a circuit. They were all standalone at that time, but Sixes, Fields Chapel, and Holly Springs were all on the same circuit. And so that history is what sort of kind of grew out of what, as Wesley was organizing first in the British Isles, but then it started coming to America because people were coming. Colonization was happening, and they were coming. And so as they did, and they had been part of this movement, of course, they want to continue it. And so the church began there. And then Wesley said, well, we got to respond to it. So he started sending preachers, to go and to serve these things and to ride the circuits and stuff.
So if I can ask a question real quick.
Yeah, sure. I'm talking way too much.
In the structure, did they kind of keep a similar structure where they kind of kept putting people into these groups and then like having these like meals and stuff? Because you said a feast.
I think so. That's all part of the history. I think the church services on Sundays began to be more of a regular thing.
Okay.
Even though it was still under the Anglican auspices of the Anglican Church, it was the Wesleyan movement, the Methodist movement within that. But yeah, churches started happening and growing. And for example, and lots of times they would call them meeting houses.
Yeah.
And I think I put up actually it was a painting. There was on a photograph of it, of John Street Methodist Church in New York. It's in New York City today. When you see the mural of it, it looks rural because it was then. Yeah. But like the very first one that was planted was by a couple of people that came over after having been involved with one in America, and they started the meeting house. They started a society, as they called them, there in New York, which is still there. Not the original one, but the church itself is still there as a building. It's been there for years, and they're still active, and they're in the financial district of New York City, just a couple of blocks away from the World Trade Center.
It's fascinating, just even as you're talking, thinking about the structural style of it, as it didn't have, at this point, it didn't have a ton of organization, but it sounded like, or I guess it was getting more organization through this process, but like hearing how these groups started, like formed, were together for a while, and then like it's like they almost went to different areas and recreated it.
Yeah, Wesley, well, first of all, to say it wasn't, Wesley is going to organize stuff. That's just his DNA. He is was a very organized person. But what he did, to your point, was that he just gave this sort of structure that things could grow on.
Right.
As opposed to, I like to use the analogy of, if you fence in something, you got a little garden, you fence in, so what? It's going to be contained within that. But then you put a trellis up, it's just this structure for things to grow on.
Yeah.
And so if we can think about it that, there were also some of the things that he put in with like the classes and the accountability, and some of the things that I think that made it tick and really made it work, that I feel like that's part that we need to recover and go back to. The small groups meeting face to face, and I talked about a little bit of this on Sunday, but they were to get together once a week, 12 people, and hold each other accountable. Right. And there was a whole list of words you can look it up online.
Certain questions.
Certain questions. I think the first question is, how goes it with your soul? Which is an important question, but to have somebody
right into the deep end.
Yeah, somebody look you in the eye once a week and say, how goes it with your soul? Yeah. And lots of things come out of that. I mean, confession can grow out of that, but also
celebration,
but also care. Yeah. My soul is not going well this week. My daughter's sick. I lost my job. Those kinds of things can come out of that sharing. And so, those were, within the larger churches. This was the DNA that was making it work as it was spreading. And so what happened next was America was feeling the need to have its independence from Britain. And I should say this from the beginning. I didn't say it on Sunday, but Wesley was not for the independence. He wanted the colonies, at least initially. Right. He wasn't like, America first, we got to get the independence. He was reluctant to that. I think because he was Britain, but I just think he also anticipated the stress and structure of that. And so, take that however you want to, but I think at least you realize his devotion to the Anglican Church. Yeah. He was not a renegade trying to start a new denomination. Sure. He wasn't trying to break up. He was trying to always bring revitalization to it. Right. But then when it happened, 1776 came, and that's when the Declaration, and independence, and all the stuff. So at some point in that, now we have our independence from Britain, and the Anglican Church, which actually another word for it is the Church of England, they no longer have authority. And so these clergy that are there, what is their authority? Where do their credentials come from? So he saw the need that they're going to have to organize and actually have a denomination there, have a church there. And so in 1784, they organized what they call the Christmas Conference. Right. Now, conferencing had already started, and I failed to, in my little review, to give that, is that he started getting everybody, at least all the preachers together, once a year for a conference. And so that still goes on today, right?
Yep. CERTA's annual conference.
Annual conference every day. So we're a conferencing people. We have charge conference. We have, general conference. We have jurisdictional conference. We have annual conference. And so, it's because we work together to make decisions,
right,
and the need for that. So, but he got together because they need to make this decision. And it's in Baltimore, Maryland. They call it the Christmas Conference in 1784. And that's where the Methodist Church, as we know it, was formed. The first bishops, I've forgotten the name of one of them. One of them was Thomas Coke. There was another one, I think it was ordained there. Francis Asbury was also a part of that conference. He wasn't ordained there. I think that came later, but he already had credentials at that point. So anyway, as I remember it, but he eventually, Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury famously were the most, I think, influential early bishops in the Methodist Church. And that's where, they took Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury's last name and punched them together, made Cokesbury. And there you go around, there's Coke Memorial United Methodist Church, there's Asbury United Methodist Church, there's Asbury Seminary. So you begin to hear these Methodist names that sort of are here and there. Heritage. A lot of Wesley stuff and things as well. And so that's where they began. They continued with their circuit riding, and the movement continued to grow in America. It was the fastest growing religious denomination in the United States for a long time. Yeah. Actually, as the United States grew, the Methodist Church grew. As well. And we are not the largest now. I think we're maybe the second largest denomination now. We've gone through splits and divisions, and then getting back together. Initially, it was the Methodist Episcopal Church, because Episcopal is a form of government, not a denomination. Episcopal, in that we have bishops and we're organized that way. So we're the Methodist Episcopal Church. And then this around the time of Civil War, and as that all happened, the South broke away. So we had the Methodist Episcopal South and Methodist Episcopal North, and then they eventually we came back together to form with the United Brethren Church, which is probably another podcast for some other time about the United Brethren, because that's actually part of our DNA and our past too. But the United Brethren, that's where that name comes from. That became the United Methodist Church when they put those two together. So that's actually a little bit more than I talked about on Sunday. But to get us there,
it's a deep dive after all.
Yeah, of how we got to where we are now, and of course our church is facing some other division now. But the Methodist movement continues in both of those. But whatever comes out of it, will be Wesleyan. And so John Wesley's influence is, he wasn't Jesus Christ.
No.
He wasn't a perfect person, but he was a brilliant individual who had a certain method of doing things and a certain inclusive kind of theology, practical theology, that people resonated with. And, it's been my spiritual home my whole life, Yeah.
It's awesome. I keep coming back to the small groups area, because it's, being in church for so long, I think as a young kid, you always saw success in like mass quantities of people, like you're like, oh, I'm in a space where there's 400 or 500 other people, but to see this movement really happening out of 12 people clusters, and that just kept growing and forming, and just thinking about the intimacy of that, people not just going to a spot and then leaving, but connecting into something where they're
doing life together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that concept, and I think, that's probably still a message to church universal. I think here at Hickory Flat, I think we have several clusters of people who are doing life together, and
I agree. Maybe not in the same way, and that's okay, because things can be contextualized. But I think we do need to remember sort of the center and the origin of what was happening there.
Yeah.
They're sort of happening, maybe, but not with super intention. They are happening, and it's the things that we have become and started doing as a church, where we became very program driven.
Yeah.
And we still are very program driven. And I would say, as far as recapturing what Wesley was trying to do, is making disciples.
Yeah.
And so it was, those groups were disciple driven. Yeah. And so when you talked about being in a small group or a band or whatever, or, even within, one of those communities that would come together for a love feast.
Yeah.
I mean, there was discipling that was happening, and discipleship can be kind of a byproduct. I'm not sure I know we're not as intentional as we need to be and should be. So I think that's maybe part of what this might call us back to, and revisiting Wesley at this particular time.
That's what I was about to say. I think there's a space within what we're hearing that we can kind of retake and maybe bring into some of the things that we are doing. Like, when's the last time we really had like these intentionally accountable conversations of like, how is your soul?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, really checking in with somebody, as opposed to just maybe grabbing lunch and talking a little bit about church and then kind of moving on to the next thing or whatever. There's some space in saying like, hey, we're walking hand in hand, arm in arm towards this together. I want to make sure you're good so I can be good with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a difference, and we need both these things. But right belief and right practice.
Yeah.
Okay, those are important. I think that there's been a tendency, I think particularly in the American church recently, to have all the emphasis on right belief. Do I believe the right things? Whether I'm acting and putting them in action or not, I believe the right things.
Yeah.
And I think Wesley was one who was committed to action.
Yeah.
Yeah. The head, the heart, and the hand thing again. The head was important, and he never left that, but, and we'll talk this weekend a lot more about the theology and structure. We'll talk about the 4 alls of Methodism, and sort of his way of interpreting the Bible and that kind of thing this weekend. He never got away from that, but he was about putting in action. Those people, that's why you see this sort of combination of evangelical fervor and social action that comes together. We're both those things.
Yeah.
Lots of times you see churches or movements that are one or the other of those things. We're both those things. And that is our roots. That is our heritage and our DNA to lean back into.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. And I think, as Dave has alluded, these first 2 are kind of scene setters for what's coming up in this series.
Right.
You need to know the backstory and understand the structure to understand, why we're called the Methodist. And you need to understand that, so that as we start talking about theology, you can see kind of where he's come from, where he's pulled this stuff out of, Well,
I mean, and I'm guessing, because I think I went to the Methodist Church for years before I realized where the origin of that name came from.
Yeah.
And so it's right there in our name.
Yeah.
There's a method. It's like, as you probably notice, hey, it kind of sounds like Methodist, Methodist, but it is that we are a people. We do things in a certain way. We have a practice that we live into. Yeah. And so we'll get some more into the theology, and we have added a week.
Yeah.
This initially was going to be 3 weeks, but there was just too much to cover, so we have added a week and pushed some things back. So we'll be 4 weeks on this.
I love it, because I think the history is important, but also, I've taught confirmation several times, and when you
You're
can
teaching it right now, aren't you?
I'm teaching it right now.
Yeah.
But when you really can kind of get to the nitty gritty of how this is structured and why we're doing the things we do, it's actually really cool. There's some really cool pieces that maybe we're not good overall at broadcasting that year round, but to have a space like this where we could kind of come and go, oh yeah, you know what I mean? Like I've appreciated it. Like there's even bits and pieces I'm like, I don't remember that, but that's cool. You know what I mean? Because I don't hear this, like, it's been a couple years since I saw Confirmation, but I don't always hear this story. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and it was interesting in my SPR review this year. And one of the questions that came up in that I think the conference had provided them was talking about like adult confirmation that kind of came up. If y'all, the question was asked me, have you ever done adult confirmation?
Yeah,
and I was like, this. And at that point, I knew this was coming. I said, just wait. We're actually doing something that's kind of like confirmation, because this is stuff that you do go over in confirmation class.
right.
And I do think about, like, I have, in new member classes in the past, been called in, whoever's leading, and say, hey, I need to come in and talk about John Wesley and the theology of the Methodist Church and all that stuff. Oh, and by the way, you got 20 minutes. And so to have, at least 3 or 4 times that amount of time to sort of unpack that, plus having the podcast to go a little bit deeper on it, has been it's been a lot of fun for me.
For sure.
It has.
Well, as we look to next week to kind of continue the conversation, just think about, what are ways that you can be intentional, as John Wesley started in these groups, be intentional with somebody and be able to ask them, how is their soul? Maybe that's a good a takeaway is try asking a friend. Maybe use different language, but ask them how they are. Ask them what's going on with their heart and stuff like that, and see what kind of comes out. Because I'm a person that I honestly don't feel like I'm very good at small talk. Do you know what I mean? Like how's the weather or whatever.
I'm exceptionally good at it.
You are really good at that, which I admire that in people, that they can do.
Well, it can be pretty superficial,
but I think there's places for both. But I'm like, sometimes I just want to get to the meat of the conversation and let's just dive in. Do you know what I mean? Like, if this is where we're going, let's stop beating around the bush and we know the weather is going to change in 20 minutes, whatever. You know what I mean? But that's a question that just cuts straight to the core.
Yeah.
Of, hey, I care about you and I want to know
it's an important question.
How you are, and
it is.
So ask somebody that this week. That's your takeaway. That's your homework for those of you that are watching right now. But as we're wrapping up, Dave, is there anything you want to add here at the end?
No, just looking forward to the next couple of Sundays and doing this. And as we've been talking about in staff meeting earlier today, it's a very busy time for us as a church, and I know it is for individual families and stuff too. But there's a lot of things to connect to at the church over these next couple of months, actually. And so, take a look at those on our website or Facebook or however as you hear about them, and get connected, because our there's kind of a movement going home at Hickory Flat. There's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm growing, and so I want you to all be a part of it. So check that out. There's a lot of great things coming up.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, this wraps it up. Thank you guys so much for watching. You know where to find us in the comments sections, all that stuff. We go over it weekly. But without further ado, thank you guys so much for watching.
Yeah. God bless.
We'll catch you next time.